Today we're making wine by fermenting grape juice with the yeast from our kombucha starter. And the process is going to be just about the same as normal winemaking. The yeast is going to break down the sugar into alcohols, and the chemical components that make up the flavor in the grape juice are going to be broken down and new ones are going to be created. And once most of that sugar has been used up, we're going to bottle it and add a little bit more sugar to balance that out. And why would we do something like this? Well, if we added grape juice in the bottling stage to flavor it, that grape juice taste is going to be almost unchanged. In the same way that kombucha doesn't taste like sweet tea, our fermented fruit juice isn't going to taste like that fruit juice. And since we're going to have a unique blend of yeast in our SCOBY, this is going to be a uniquely flavored wine as well. The only downside and the biggest difference is that we also have our acid-producing bacteria. They are going to take all that alcohol that's produced and they're going to turn it into two main types of acid. One of those is acetic acid, which is found in vinegar, and if you have too much of that in normal winemaking, that's considered a vinegar taint, and it kind of ruins the batch. And here it's unavoidable. That acid is produced from the fructose, which is mostly found in fruit sugars. The other main acid is gluconic acid, produced from glucose, and together they might make this drink a little bit too acidic to be palatable, because the grape juice itself is already very acidic, at least as acidic as our kombucha is going to be. And I think if we added a bunch of acid to wine, it might hurt to drink. So I think we're going to have a lot to balance out on the back end. And this grape juice sugar is going to be entirely replacing our usual white sugar. White sugar is composed of sucrose, which would break down evenly into glucose and fructose. And when swapping that out with fruit juice, we want to make sure we have the same sort of ratio, because we want those two acids in perfect balance. And thankfully, grape juice is a pretty even split between the two, so we should be okay. Downside number two is that grape juice is going to bring a lot of tannins, and tannins are used as nutrients for our SCOBY. But then our black tea is also going to have a lot of tannins and caffeine, and that could make our yeast overpopulate, which could turn our brew cloudy and also produce a bunch of off flavors. When we tried a primary fermentation with our beer kit, it did get noticeably cloudy, and it did have a weird taste of pineapple and gym socks. And hopefully we won't be replicating that here. And the third major hurdle is, do we want extra acidic, carbonated Concord grape juice wine? A problem for another day. But I'm excited to find out, because I did actually get my start with winemaking. I just thought it was fascinating that you could make an alcoholic beverage with just sugar, yeast, and a bottle. And then, believe it or not, it quickly spiraled out of control into a lot of cucumber and carrot wine batches that were entirely undrinkable. They sat on my shelf forever until I dropped the hobby. Which is why with kombucha, I always try to keep one foot somewhere slightly sane, and I always produce at least some drinkable kombucha every week. So I think the acid's going to be our biggest hurdle, but I think I've got a way for us to approximate how much sugar needs to be added, so we don't waste as much like we did with the beer kit. And to get started, I've already got my 2.5 cups of kombucha starter here. This was made from black tea. To that, I've got 1 can of concentrated grapefruit juice. This is 100% juice. There's no preservatives. There's no added sugar. And it'll come out to 216 grams of sugar. I use 200 grams of white sugar when I'm normally brewing. So I'd say this is close enough. That was a joke. I'm going to measure off 26 milliliters. And to this, I've brewed 6 bags of black tea. And this I'm going to let go for about 5 days before I start tasting it, just to make sure it doesn't get too acidic too quickly. And then we should be ready to bottle. 5 days have passed, and I believe our wine kombucha is now ready. Just going to take another quick taste. It's quite sour. It's almost like a grape Sour Patch Kid. So I think I'm going to call it. And our black tea kombucha usually takes 7 full days, so this is quicker, kind of like we expected. And this pellicle does look pretty nice and healthy, and I don't hate the flavor, so I think I'm going to keep it. And this is hazier than usual, but I'm not getting any sort of weird yeasty flavors, no sort of off notes, so I think it's going to be okay. And to avoid throwing so much away this time, I'm going to try and make a test batch so we can narrow in a little closer on how much sugar should be added. Perhaps a little needlessly technical, but when I'm making plain kombucha, I usually add about 1 gram of simple syrup for 33.5 grams of kombucha. Wow. After carbonating and a stint in the refrigerator, we are ready to try our first bottle here of our hippie wine. And I'm starting with a bottle here in the middle of our sugar additions, and we'll see which direction we need to move from there. So this is 18 grams of simple syrup. Perhaps too carbonated. It is mostly Concord grape that I smell, but there is some of that yeasty funk underneath. See how it tastes. Ooh! Well, that's delicious. I'm not tasting any of that yeasty funk. There is too much carbonation, I would usually think, but kind of works here. It's kind of like a sparkling grape juice. But I am smelling that yeast funk a little bit more now. But it's not there at all in the taste. It is distinctly grape, but not distinctly red wine. And there's a good sweet-sour balance, but I think I would want more sour. So I think let's drop down a bottle and see where that's at. This is good for a sparkling grape juice, though. This is 16 grams of simple syrup. Not much of a difference, but less of a pop. No, too sour. The last one was a lot better. Yeah, because it's not a sour that's got much depth or flavor. There's no real complexity to that sourness. It's just something that coats your tongue with a real one-note punch. I'm surprised at how much that buries it, because it's hard to pick up really any flavor there either. This definitely needs the extra sugar. So let's try one above where we were. Yeah. This is 20 grams of simple syrup. More yeasty funk up front. It was just a whole mouthful of carbonation. It tastes less sweet than our original bottle. It tastes more like a cold carbonated red wine than a sparkling grape juice. Is that better? Would I want to drink that with anything? There's so much fizz, though, it's kind of hard to drink a lot of. I think it's a good representation of fermented Concord grape juice. But I'll say it's not more pleasant to drink than our first bottle. Let's go one higher up. I'm pouring too much into these glasses. I think my palate is shot. Before the cracker, this tasted just kind of sour and fizzy, but it tastes a lot more of that sweetness now. Very pleasant. I do taste the acidity too. I think that is still a nice balance there. Too much carbonation, but I think anything over that 18 grams of simple syrup is pretty tasty. Yeah, this is my favorite so far. This is 22 grams of simple syrup, but we have one more above this. We have our 26 gram. Let's see if that's any different. We're going to take a sip of this, and then I've got thoughts to share. Feels like the entirety of my body is filled with fizz. Yeasty, grapey. Too sweet. It's pleasant. It's a little too sweet for me right now, but I feel like if I drink this just independently, if I drink this later in the week, I'm not going to think that. I'm going to think it's pretty tasty, especially if I haven't drank just 5 bottles in a row of it. So what did we learn from all this? I would say that I think that if I did this again, I would use less tea, because I think that having that much tea in it made the yeast thrive a little too well, gave us some of that yeasty notes, gave us a little too much carbonation, and I think that was a problem. I think if we dialed that tea back down, I think this would be more pleasant. Then the question becomes, is this still worth doing if it was more pleasant? For me, not in particular, no. I don't really like the taste of Concord grape juice or fermented Concord grape juice, so I would say this is not for me. It doesn't mean it's not worthwhile to try, though. I know that one of the popular recipes is from Noma's fermentation guide, where they advise using apple juice instead of grape juice. And apple juice kind of has that similar split of fructose to glucose that grape juice does, so it should be an even match. But people often run into trouble because this is the first kombucha fermentation they try, and if their culture's not very well established, I've only heard of people who have trouble with it. I don't think I've ever heard of anyone who has succeeded. But I don't think mine struggled very much. It seemed to do pretty well. So I think it's good to know that you can throw in any fruit juice in the primary fermentation. Use that for your primary sugar. Have it turn out okay as long as your starter is strong enough. Because you could try this with apple juice. You could try this with any other sort of concentrated fruit juice. And it would produce interesting flavors. It didn't change it as much as I had hoped. Perhaps since it's not fermenting as long as wine, it didn't have much time to change that flavor. But it did have an effect, and I do think I like this better than if I just added grape juice directly to our bottle for flavoring. And I would say I don't think I'll have any trouble finishing off these bottles. Except maybe the 2 lowest syrup additions. I did not like that much acidity. I did not like that type of acidity, at least. But thank you for joining us. This is Reckless Pooch.